Welcome to the very first episode of Scoring Opportunity, a Bundesliga Fantasy Manager podcast. I am your host, Fred, and you can find me on Twitter as @TimeToNotebremse, where I am active in the wonderful Bundesliga Fantasy Manager community. This podcast is also on Twitter with the handle @ScoringUp_pod. What can you expect from this podcast? It's all about getting your fantasy team ready for the coming match day. We'll have a game week review from a fantasy points perspective, a look at my own team where I'll discuss my triumphs and mistakes along the way, as well as an in-depth halftime segment where I'll analyze one or several players, talk about BL fantasy strategy, or have a conversation with other fantasy managers. The main portion of the show, though, will be dedicated to your listener questions. There are no bad questions because any question you have, another manager may have too. Also, the answer to your particular question may prompt a shift in perspective for another manager who may not have considered certain players. Let's all help each other out and make this game a more enjoyable experience for everyone. Let's get going. Here's a quick review of last weekend's matches. The match day started with Hoffenheim versus Herta in the Friday evening game. Herta showed none of the fighting spirit from their previous two matches and went down 2-0 to Hoffenheim, with none of their players impressing. For Hoffenheim, Kramaric and Rudy scored goals, with Kramaric netting 13 points. Kevin Akpoguma also ended the match on 13 points, although all of them were defensive points, 1 duels and the clean sheet bonus. Akpoguma played as the right wingback, but had a more defensive role as opposed to Robert Sko. He's listed as a striker in the game, but played left wingback in an attacking role. Unfortunately, because of him playing out of position, Sko is not a good option for fantasy managers. On to the Saturday matches. First, let's look back at Freiburg against Fürth. Was this the return of Grifo? We all can remember the Grifo of last season, where it seemed like you could rely on him getting 10 plus points per match. Against Fürth, Grifo made a ton of shots and slotted home a penalty for the 3-1 score. Höfler also scored a goal off a corner by Grifo. Gunter continued to do Gunter things, chipping in with a lot of passes to shots. On the other side, Fürth is not a team to invest in. Even their goalkeepers aren't getting enough save points to warrant their inclusion into our teams. Freiburg is still unbeaten in the league, and this side is chock full of budget enablers for your fantasy team. Any of their defenders are worth a punt, and Jong and Höhler seem to be working together well up front, with Jong of course playing out of position in that striker role, despite being listed as a midfielder in the game. We then saw Wolfsburg under new manager Florian Kohfeldt beat a weakened Leverkusen side 2-0 away. Wolfsburg played with more pizzazz than we've seen under Van Bommel. Of course, this could be due to the new manager boost. Mecha was very active, scoring a goal in the process. He could become a decent budget third striker option for now 8.7 million, but we'll have to see what system Kohfeldt will play once Weghorst comes back into the squad. Maximilian Arnold had a 15-point match, scoring the second Wolfsburg goal, but at 12.8 million, he's only a fringe option for fantasy managers, only averaging 5 points per match, although he is playing in a more attacking role under Kohfeldt. Leverkusen sorely missed someone of Schick's pedigree up front. They looked mostly toothless, with the exception of Demirbay, who scored a decent 9 points. It's a sad match day when Wirtz scores a measly 3 points. Everyone was wondering how Bayern was going to react after their historic loss in the DFB Pokal to Gladbach during the week, and they showed they were not shaken, beating Union 5-2 in Berlin. Müller was by far the standout asset, being a part of 4 of the 5 Bayern goals and scoring 23 points. He's always on my radar, but now especially with both Haaland and Schick out. Lewandowski, of course, did his thing, as well as Sané and Coman on his comeback. Berlin put in a good fight, even scoring twice in the process, but only Gieselmann had a good fantasy points game with 9 scored. However, Union continued to be an interesting side with some good fantasy assets like Amoni, Gieselmann, Kruse, and Trimmel. We saw a repeat of the midweek DFB Pokal match between Bielefeld and Mainz, and again Mainz were the victors with a 2-1 scoreline. Burkhardt is cementing his status as a budget striker star with a 13-pointer. This match provided a lot of value fantasy points-wise, because even losers Bielefeld created a lot of chances with 6 players scoring at least 7 points or more. The strike partnership between Burkhardt and Onisivo looks fruitful, and I am keeping my eye on that. Bielefeld's Wimmer, Schöpf, and Fernandes also looked interesting as budget options, and I would only wait for Bielefeld to win some matches before picking their players for my team. On to the next match, and how about that, folks? Dortmund kept a clean sheet. Although Köln created a ton of chances, none of them really troubled BVB goalie Kobel, who racked up an impressive 15 points this match day. Other standouts for Dortmund were Mats Hummels with 12 points and Julian Brandt with an assist and 11 points. Köln's players scored fantasy points in moderation, despite their attacking intent. Of course, it would have been a different picture if they had scored. Uth and Modest were the most active and scored 8 points each. Dortmund can win without Haaland, but they look like a completely different side. I won't be getting in Dortmund players until Guerrero comes back from injury. The Saturday evening match between Frankfurt and Leipzig ended in a draw in which Leipzig simply failed to put the game to rest with some missed big chances. Top scorers for Leipzig were Orban with 16 points, Szoboszlai with 13, and Paulsen and Nkunku with 9 each. I'm not interested in Orban because he got a lucky assist in this match, and we can get defenders with more attacking returns for his 11.8 million price tag. On the other hand, Angelino disappointed with a mere 6 points. Not sure if it's the system, but he's definitely not the same fantasy asset he was in the first 2/3 of last season, and I'll be looking to get him out of my team this coming unlimited transfer window. As for Frankfurt, they were lucky to get a draw with Tuta's goal at the death. Kostic is still the only viable Frankfurt fantasy asset. We'll get to Kostic later in the show. The only other honorable mention would be goalie Kevin Trapp. The Sunday afternoon fixture saw Augsburg triumphant 4-1 winners over Stuttgart. Last year's darling Stuttgart are now succumbing to the overwhelming amounts of shots they concede. Their defense are really in shambles. Augsburg profited from this, netting 4 goals with 4 different scorers. Andy Zakiri, on loan from Brighton, was particularly active, topping the scorer list with 15 points, although not scoring a goal in the process. 8 players from Augsburg scored 7 or more points, whereas only Mangala and Endo scored a decent amount of points, Bredlow getting a legendary 12 points from saved shots alone. Stuttgart defenders are now low on my list despite their continued attacking prowess. However, the leakiness in front of goal outweighs their consideration at the moment. A great direct free kick by Danny Blum wasn't enough to hold off Gladbach in Bochum's 2-1 loss in the matchday's final fixture. Playa was back in the starting lineup and scored a goal and 16 points. Hofmann and Scally continue to be valuable picks, and Benzebaini is worth a look in case your budget doesn't allow you getting in a premium price defender like Gunter, Davies, or Guerrero when he returns from injury. Bochum fought well, but in the end fell short. They looked the much stronger of the two promoted teams, but have a long road ahead of them if they want to avoid the drop. This match didn't produce much fantasy value from Bochum players, except Holtmann with 7 points. Riemann continues to be a great goalkeeping option though. Now a look at my team. I transferred in Kramaric, Jong, and Gunter for the injured Schick, as well as Holtmann and Gieselmann. Wirtz, Angelino, and Frimpong disappointed with a combined 15 points and were replaced with my Gladbach assets for the final fixture of the matchday. Embolo, Scally, and Hofmann came in and got me a net 38 points, with Scally and Hofmann both getting 24 points each as star men. I have been relying on the last fixture of the matchday for a good portion of my points in recent weeks. 3 weeks ago, I had a major haul with 3 Leverkusen assets. Now I'm banking on the Gladbach run of standalone fixtures to get me some extra opportunities to change my star men if need be, and I needed it this week. For the coming matchday 11, I'm looking at adding Trimmel, Schöpf, and Awoniyi in place of Gvardiol, Jung, and Embolo. Now on to the halftime segment, where each week we'll take an in-depth look at certain players or teams, talk about BL fantasy strategies, or have a conversation with other fantasy managers. This week, we'll be taking a deeper look at Nico Gieselmann, Union Berlin's attacking left wingback. Due to a tactical change employed by Union coach Urs Fischer, Gieselmann is a transformed player. He already has 3 Bundesliga campaigns under his belt, as well as 5 Bundesliga 2 campaigns, but in none of them has he been so prolific. After match day 10, he's at 3 goals and 1 assist, his record for a full season being 4 goals, 3 assists back in 2014-15 with Fürth in Bundesliga 2. His heat map, according to sofascore.com, clearly shows him staying wide in typical left wingback fashion, but Gieselmann becomes dangerous as he cuts in with a late run into the box, whereas Trimmel, who typically plays in the right wingback position, stays wider, sending in devastating crosses. Union's tactics are geared towards getting Awoniyi and a second striker, either Becker, Ingvartsen, or Vogelsammer, into the box with an initial attack, or as a decoy to then get the ball to Kruse or the onrushing Gieselmann to great effect. In a fantasy Bundesliga sense, Gieselmann provides a significant attacking threat due to defender goals being worth 6 points each, as opposed to 4 points for a striker goal. He also gets a point boost for shots taken, as well as passes to shots. At now only 4.5 million, Gieselmann is a steal and needs to be in everyone's team. I did take him out for the match against Bayern with the plan to bring him back immediately, and he still managed to score 9 points despite Union conceding 5 times against the Bavarians. Similar players are Scally from Gladbach and Kubler of Freiburg. Having all 3 gets you a lot of points on the cheap, so you would be able to bring in some higher priced midfield or striker assets you couldn't normally afford. Now let's have a look at your listener questions. This first one is from Gavin Doyle, who asks, the moves I'm thinking of making for match day 11 are Jong, Angelino, and Funk out, Caligiuri, Gieselmann, and Zentner in, with nothing in the bank. But Freiburg and Leipzig have tough fixtures, and Funk has been stinking up my goal for weeks now. My other keeper is Gikiewicz. Thoughts? My thoughts would first be to keep Funk until the unlimited transfer window and try to upgrade an outfield player slot. I agree with taking Jung out. I will probably be doing the same. I also agree with getting in Gieselmann, which I will also be doing. The Leipzig-Dortmund fixture sees Leipzig with a 49% chance of winning based on players available, offensive and defensive stats, as well as past results. All this according to 538's Bundesliga predictions. I would also favor Leipzig in this fixture, so I would keep Angelino and upgrade one of your other players, probably to a standalone fixture because with transfers comes control. You can control which fixtures you target. Caligiuri is a good one-week punt in my opinion. Wolfsburg has been seemingly rejuvenated under Kofeld, but Augsburg also had an important win last match day, so it'll be an interesting fixture to watch. For Caligiuri's price tag, you could also get in Kainz in the standalone fixture against Union or Endo against Bielefeld. Another listener question from friend of the show Trevor, who runs the wonderful Fantasy Tipsters website, which is a great source for articles on not only Bundesliga fantasy but also other fantasy football games. I myself have written for him as well. His question is, should I sell Christian Gunter or hold him against Bayern? If there was one Freiburg player I would hold against Bayern, it would be Gunter. He is so consistent with scoring points that even if Freiburg should go down to Bayern, I can still see Gunter getting close to or over double-digit points this match day. A hold in my opinion, as I will actually be doing the same. One last one from Will Burma Hemsworth. He's asking for Wolfsburg assets and if Kostic is worth keeping due to injury doubts. To Kostic first. Yes, he didn't travel with the team to Greece for tonight's Europa League match, and yes, Glasner confirmed that it is a problem with his Achilles tendon and ankle. According to Liga Insider, Kostic is a doubt for the match against Fürth. I could see him getting rested against the Kleeblatt, even if he were fit. Alternatives to Kostic would be Goretzka, Soboschlei, or maybe a punt on double Gladbach midfield Hofmann and Stindl if you already have one or the other. On to Wolfsburg assets. Wolfsburg defenders were a valuable commodity at the beginning of the season due to their clean sheets and the fullbacks' attacking contributions. Right now, only Mbabu stands out. In midfield, you have a choice between Arnold, who is in a more attacking role under Kofeld, and Ridley Baku, provided he isn't playing right back. As mentioned earlier in the show, Lukas Mecha has been an able replacement for Weghorst, and it looks like both will be starting their match against Augsburg. So the decision between Mecha and Weghorst will be dependent on your budget. Now on to this week's rundown of my top 3 differential picks per outfield position. Usually I will also have a list of 3 players who you can take a 1-week punt on, but since this is the last match day before an unlimited transfer window, all of these differential picks could be classified as punts. Starting in defense, we have Stefan Bell. He had a high-value match 2 match days ago, scoring 25 points. He is unlikely to repeat that effort, but he is still a valuable asset for a 5.5 million defender on a strong defensive team, scoring the plurality of his points via 1 duels. The second defender spot goes to Danilo Suarez. The Bochum fullback is a 1-duel machine, scoring a whopping 44 points in that fashion so far this season, which is tied for first place in that category with Schimakon of Leipzig. He does have his share in Bochum's attacks, but that's not his game in a fantasy sense. The top spot among defender differentials this week goes to Marvin Friedrich of Union. At 8.9 million, he's pricier than the other picks, but he is an aerial threat during Union's set pieces, which leads him to collect those shot points along with a good 3.11 duels per game. In midfield, we'll start with Dominik Szoboszlai. The Hungarian always provides good value, the only caveat being that he doesn't start every match. However, even off the bench, he will get you points, because despite only playing 9 matches, with only 5 of them from the starting lineup, he has the 4th highest point total of all midfielders in the game. If Nkunku wasn't such a sure thing, Szoboszlai would be the standout Leipzig pick. The second spot in midfield goes to Christoph Baumgartner. His price tag is almost identical to Szoboszlai. Of course, he doesn't score nearly as many points, but he is owned by a lot fewer managers than the Hungarian maestro. Injury prone, but always active during matches, when on the pitch, Baumgartner plays an advanced midfield role, a lot of times looking like a second striker, as evidenced by the fact that he gets goals and shots, but hasn't picked up any points for passes to shots this season. However, he is averaging 7 points per game on the season. The top differential pick in midfield is, in my consideration, Daniel Caligiuri. Augsburg looked like a different team against Stuttgart, and Caligiuri is the creator in their midfield. He scored 28 points in their last 3 fixtures, and taking a 1-week punt on him before the unlimited transfer window could boost your overall rank, since he is owned by only 2.79% of the top 500 managers and 9.8% overall. Now on to the strikers. In the absence of Haaland, Schick, and Weghorst, many managers went for Kramaric, including me. Keep him if you have him, but here's my top 3 recommendations for differential strikers. Third on the list is Anthony Modeste. He's been raking in the goals and shots this season, and at 8 million he is a great option in your forward line. Playing against Union this weekend could see him continue his goal-scoring streak. In the 2 spot, we have Taiwo Awoniyi. The Bayern match aside, he scored 40 points in his last 4 match days. He's owned by only 3% of managers and will face Modeste and Cohn this coming weekend. It could be an interesting competition between the two. Who will score more goals in that match? The top pick goes to Lukas Mecha of Wolfsburg. Although Weghorst is slated to come back this weekend against Augsburg, Mecha has been a worthy replacement with 2 goals in as many games, including the midweek win versus RB Salzburg in the Champions League. But I could see new manager Kofeld utilize the Mecha up front with Weghorst, or keep Weghorst on the bench at the start. Why bench an informed striker who can play as a dangerous winger as well? This has been the inaugural episode of Scoring Opportunity, a Bundesliga Fantasy Manager podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thanks so much to all of you who have liked and retweeted the announcement for the podcast or sent in listener questions. Your support is really appreciated. I will be putting out episodes during the international break in order to get into a publishing rhythm. Next week I'll be talking about the various online resources to improve your fantasy game. Until next time, this has been your host, Fred. Let's have a great match day.